great presentations today to learn about maybe some opportunities for this committee to look at various issues. But to do that, we'll need that information from the legislative post audit on reviewing available options for acquiring state office space. And I believe Macy Smith, Senior Auditor, Kansas Legislative Division of Post Audit is here. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Okay. All right, Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Macy Smith from your staff at the Division of Legislative Post Audit. And for those of you who are not familiar with post audit, we are nonpartisan legislative staff like revisers and research staff. And our role is to provide legislators accurate and unbiased information through our performance audit reports. Generally, the topics that we are auditing are requested by legislators. So for this particular audit, we answered two questions. The first was, how much office space is owned or leased by the state? And how is that space being used? And our second question was, what cost-effective options are available for state agencies to acquire office space in Topeka? Overall, we found that state agencies reported having about 4.1 million square feet, that most of that space is actively being used by state employees, and that for state agencies in Topeka, the primary option for acquiring office space is to lease. First, I'm going to walk you through a little background on the topic. Then I will discuss how much office space agencies have and are using. And finally, we will move into options and costs for acquiring office space in Topeka. As background, and this information starts on page 4 in the audit report, there are two main options for acquiring office space. The first is to purchase a private building or build a new one. This can be done through outright buying the building or setting up a lease purchase agreement. And a lease purchase agreement is, in essence, a rent-to-own contract where an agency agrees to purchase the property in the future. The second option is to contract with another party to lease office space. Here I want to note that the state itself owns 6 buildings: Curtis, Docking, Eisenhower, and Landon state office buildings, also Memorial Hall and the new KDHE lab. State agencies can lease space from these buildings from the state, and this is managed by the Department of Administration. To actually acquire space, agencies decide what their space needs are, where they want to locate, and whether or not they want to lease or purchase a space. The processes vary depending on if an agency is leasing or purchasing office space, but the Department of Administration can facilitate if agencies would like that. Then, before a lease is signed, the Department of Administration has to review that lease and approve the agency's lease agreements. So then for purchases, the legislature would approve that through the appropriations process. None of these processes or approvals require agencies to formally compare the advantages, disadvantages, and costs of leasing office space versus buying it. Now I'm going to move into discussing our audit findings, but before I do, I want to let you know that our answers are based on the information that agencies reported to us in fiscal year or for fiscal year 2025. We received information from all agencies, but that information is self-reported, which means there could be errors, but based on the work we did, we do not believe errors would significantly impact our overall audit findings. We also asked agencies to report all the office space they have. So this is going to include locations that are exclusively office space, but it also includes office space in state hospitals, correction facilities, office space at ks.gov garages, and also includes locations with a very small amount of office space. An example of this is that the Kansas State Fair has a maintenance shop in Hutchinson where about 10% of the square footage is office space. A breakdown of individual agencies and how much space they lease or own can be found in Appendix B on page 22. Now I'm going to move to discussing the first the answer to the first audit question. If you are following along in the report, this starts at the bottom of page 6. I'm first going to describe how much office space state agencies lease and own, then I'll describe how much space they are actively using. We found that across Kansas, state agencies reported owning or leasing about 4.1 million square feet of office space. Most of that office space is located in Shawnee County, and you'll see that in Figure 1 on page 7. Most state office space is also leased space, and as shown in Figure 2 on page 8, 63% of office space is leased. 32% is owned by the state agencies, and then 5% was acquired in other ways. That 5% includes office space in places like the state capitol building, as well as space in the Lansing Correctional Facility, which was acquired with a lease purchase agreement. Circling back to that leased space, this is both space that agencies lease from private landlords and space state agencies lease from the state through the Department of Administration. And that is in buildings like Landing and Docking State Office Building. Most state agencies leased space from private landlords. 67% of leased space is in privately owned buildings. 33% is in state-owned buildings. I'm going to now shift gears slightly and talk about how agencies use their space, and in the report, this starts on page 10. State agencies reported that most office space is occupied. They reported that 16 of the 524 office space locations they own or lease statewide were unoccupied. Generally, when space had been unoccupied for longer than 5 years, this had to do with the condition of the location. 3 locations were reported as being unfit to occupy because of mold and asbestos. Overall, most office space that had been unoccupied for 5 years or less ranged in size from a single office to a few cubicles. Officials reported that the space wasn't used because of either staff vacancies or future plans to hire additional staff. Agencies had an average of about 375 square feet of office space per FTE. This doesn't only count cubicles or individual offices, it includes all space within the office for the agency's exclusive use. So this would include hallways, conference rooms, or even restrooms. Even still, 375 square feet of office space per FTE is higher than the standards we reviewed recommended. But we can't say if that's appropriate or not because we did not review each agency's individual circumstances. I'm now going to discuss what agencies reported about the amount of office space they had to return all employees to work. Most agencies, and that's 70% of those agencies, reported they had enough office space for all employees to work in the office. We only asked agencies if they had capacity to accommodate all employees to be able to work on site. We did not ask for further details about their responses. 54 of the 78 agencies reported that they had enough space for all employees to work in the office. 24 agencies said they did not. I am now going to move into question 2 and what we found about options for acquiring office space in Topeka.
Macy, if you could just pause there and let's just check to see if there are any questions on question 1 at this point. Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, let me find my spot. So in the report now for question 2, this starts at the bottom of page 13. As a reminder, this question is about what cost-effective options agencies have to acquire office space in Topeka. The short answer is that we couldn't compare cost to lease versus own because nearly all agencies in Topeka lease space. Additionally, many agencies have different space needs, so while it might be more cost-effective for one agency to lease, in another scenario, it could be more cost-effective to buy space. And the space options actually available on the market also affect the agency's decisions. We did, however, see a difference between leasing from private owners as compared to the state. We were able to compare the cost of leasing office space in state-owned buildings to privately owned buildings in Topeka. If you look at page 4, or figure 4, excuse me, on page 15, what we found is shown. Leases for privately owned space generally cost less than leases for state-owned space in Topeka, and that was in fiscal year 2025. And for this work, we only looked at spaces that were office space only, and those were, of course, in Topeka. We did not include buildings primarily used for other purposes that might have a little bit of office space there. We also looked at the fully loaded costs of leasing space. So this included items like parking costs or maintenance and housekeeping costs. We asked the Department of Administration why costs to lease from the state might be higher. They told us that the state lease rate includes costs to cover future building improvements. It also includes the costs of non-leasable space like cafeterias that are shared across agencies. And also state agencies are provided services or amenities that private leasers may not provide. Finally, I want to draw your attention to page 17, where we discuss information about the office space in the newly renovated Docking State office building. And then also, we issued a recommendation to the Department of Administration related to this audit, and you can see more details about this and the department's response on page 19. That concludes my presentation, and I am happy to stand for questions.
Thank you so much. What questions do we have from the committee? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Macy. With regard to the amenities with the state lease and things of that nature and future building costs and things of that nature, I'm not even sure how to ask this question. Did you get a sense that this is money they're just kind of holding back in anticipation of future renovations or things that, how do we save the taxpayer money, bring the lease costs down on these locations? I'm not, do you get a sense of what I'm trying to go after?
Yeah, I'll try to kind of answer, but
yeah.
we did not look at that kind of pot of money and how it was being used and analyze that, so I can't tell you really that answer.
That's what they said, is anticipation of future costs, building costs and things like that.
Yeah, they explained to us that they're paying for renovations, like if an agency needs to renovate some space, whereas in private buildings, if the agency needs to renovate the space, they have to pay for that.
Mm-hmm. But the overall lease is cheaper in the private because while they're not doing the renovations, there's not that extra cost needed or anticipated.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Not sure what to do with that information, but it's, I just want to make it clear. Thanks, Macy.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. This is interesting. I'm going back to page 10 and said that the state agency reported 12 locations have been unoccupied for 5 years or fewer. Why are we leasing it if it's been unoccupied, I guess?
I'm not sure. We didn't ask each individual agency to explain what they were doing and why in our questions that we asked them.
The other question that your report brought up was if an area is can't be occupied because it's unfit, who is responsible to bring it back up to conditions that can be occupied? Is it the landowner or is it our agency?
I, again, can't speak to that. I do know that when we were asking questions about it, a couple of the answers we heard was that there were some buildings that might need to be raised because they were in just bad condition.
But we're still leasing it? Is that what
I would have to go back and look if they are owned or leased, because I cannot recall.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Well, they may be thinking, I do have a couple of quick ones. On page 11, you said that the 375 square feet per FTE is higher than recommended standards. I may have missed it. What is the recommended standard?
Give me just a second. In what we looked at, it ranged from 150 to 250 square feet per FTE.
And to kind of piggyback on Senator Thompson's question as to amenities and the cost, I would think that private landlords would also have to build in those anticipated expenses as well. So what amenities are our state-owned facilities providing that private are not?
I don't know what private would or would not be offering because we did not dig into that, but I do know that when we were discussing these things with the Department of Administration, I can recall off the top of my head, they mentioned the cafeterias and also the gym and docking as examples of amenities.
Gym and docking is very new, so I'm wondering about previous to that, but I appreciate the information. Senator Alley.
Thank you. This discussion brought up another question, and the 375 square foot per FTE, the question is, what does that include? I know in the corporate world, they don't include the hallways and the connections. Does this include the hallways?
It is any space that's for the agency's exclusive use. So yes, that would include the hallways and the conference rooms, anything within that built
All
space.
areas
Yeah.
that are not just assigned to one person, but there are shared locations.
Exactly, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here and for the presentation. Very informative.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We will now welcome to committee for the first time this session, hopefully not the last, our Inspector General, Stephen Anderson, who will give us an update on the work they have been doing since we last met. Welcome back.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Steve Anderson, Inspector General. Appreciate the opportunity to come before this committee. As always, it's a pleasure to be here and look forward to future opportunities to talk as well. The testimony I provided talks about our statute was revised during the last session and effective July 1st, 2025. It expanded our area of responsibility to include all cash, food, and health assistance programs, not just Medicaid. That also included a fiscal note that had 9 FTEs included in that. However, we did not get the funding that needed to happen for that, so those FTEs have not been hired. But we look forward to that happening, hopefully. Our core mission, of course, is to look for fraud, waste, and abuse in the Kansas programs, whether it's cash, food, or health assistance. And we do this through audits, reviews, and investigations. In my testimony includes a chart of every audit we have completed since 2021, which is basically when I became the Inspector General. The most recent report that was put out involved the HCBS assessments, and I'll get to that later in my testimony. I want to talk to you about some of our ongoing work that we're currently doing. That is the the first one is the DCF KDHE data sharing audit. We're looking at the performance audit for that is to look at data that is shared or eligibility data is shared with Department of Children and Families as well as KDHE. And we're looking at that in comparison with the Medicaid and SNAP data to see if there's differences in the eligibility information, the data that's collected, and if there's ways that those two agencies can share that data to have greater effect and more accuracy in their eligibility criteria. We know from our prior work that the eligibility criteria for SNAP and the eligibility criteria for Medicaid is different. So people can have different stories they tell the eligibility workers to become eligible for those programs. Another ongoing audit that we're working on is the pregnant woman eligibility audit. And this audit is going to look at the pregnant woman program managed by KDHE. The audit period is January 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2024. And we're looking to see are there pregnant women who are on the program who are not eligible? We're also looking to see if we have pregnant women who have not had pregnancy-related claims to confirm their pregnancy. And then we're looking to see if people are properly being transferred out of the pregnant woman program to other Medicaid programs if they're eligible. Some preliminary results on that. We have, our work thus far has found that there's 62 beneficiaries that are in the 45 and older group, because we do have quite a few people. There's over 100 women who are 45 and older that are pregnant in Kansas who report that. 62 of those appear to be fraudulently on the program, with the average capitation for that being $12,880 per person, with the highest being over $31,000. That's a combined almost $800,000 worth of capitation loss. We are planning open criminal investigations into 20 of the worst cases. We would love to open more, but we just simply, because of resources, can't do that. Another ongoing matter we have is the pharmacy dispensing fees review. We're looking at pharmacies for over-the-counter drugs that are prescribed to Medicaid recipients. There's a stocking fee or a dispensing fee that is paid to the pharmacy. We're finding a lot of variances in that program, but it's a $10.50 fee that gets paid to the pharmacy, ideally, for dispensing a over-the-counter drug. But the problem is sometimes those over-the-counter drugs are only a $2 or $3 drug. And the question is, why are we paying a dispensing fee for something like that, and why is it being prescribed when it's an over-the-counter through the Medicaid program? So we're looking at that issue. And then the HCBS audit, this is a follow-up audit. We had done an audit on HCBS that was published in 2022 that covered a lot of issues involving utilization of the system and people not using Medicaid services. So we wanted to go back and take another look and look at it from a slightly different angle. And so that program is looking at how KDADS, KDHE, and the managed care organizations are managing it. And we're looking at records from January 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2024. We published an interim report on January the 12th of this year that addresses preliminary findings that found out that functional assessments were not being completed timely for waiver participants. As a result of this, over $200 million in Medicaid funds were improperly dispensed to the MCOs during the audit period. What it turns out basically is ineligible HCBS beneficiaries should have been timely processed and transitioned out and potentially moved over to the CanCare Medically Needy program, but were not. Basically, we calculated a savings for that on an annual basis. If those people had been removed from the program and moved to a far less costly program, the Medically Needy program, the state could have saved $36 million a year. These people would have still had Medicaid benefits, they just wouldn't have been in the waiver, because the capitation for waivers is substantially higher than just standard Medicaid. So we also looked at the amount of services and get, and during our review, we found that there were some beneficiaries, a lot of beneficiaries overdue, that went for as much as 814 days without receiving a functional assessment. They're required to have annual functional assessments. And that we found that 721 people went for 4 or more years without an assessment. When they have to have annual assessments, they went for more than 4 years without an assessment. The state is required to do functional assessments on an annual basis. We only looked at 3 of the 7 waivers right now. There are additional waivers to be looked at, but our interim report only covered 3 because that's what we've got to thus far. There's more to do. And these involve the brain injury, the frail and elderly, and the physically disabled PD waiver. And in the report, it shows the error rates that we found. For example, the physically disabled waiver, we found that 35% of those people had not had the required functional assessments done. And the PD waiver is one of those ones that has a waiting list. We also reviewed the quarterly fallout reports to determine how many people on the brain injury, the frail and elderly, and the PD waiver recipients had missing or overdue assessments. We looked at a 2.5-year period, and we looked at various criteria. And some of the criteria included, did they have their initial assessment? Were they having completion of the timely reassessment, that annual reassessment? And were there overdue ones of 13 or more months? And we found a combined error rate of 29% for waiver recipients that were missing, and it breaks it down in there. And moving on to another report, we did an information brief on voter registration, and wherein we found that the state was sending voter registration packets out to numerous people. Those voter registration packets are sent every time somebody changes their address or has any kind of a change in their Medicaid thing, but we also know that DCF does the same thing for somebody who's getting SNAP. It also changes their address, so both both agencies are sending voter registration packets at the same time. The problem that was identified in there too is the KDHE's form that they have, and it's in the report, it's in Appendix A, it's missing required language by the CFR. And so consequently, they were sending them, if the person left it blank, that was treated as, yes, I want a packet. That's why so many were being sent out. And we're hoping that we can get them to change that. And we could save, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's still, it costs us over $400,000 to send these packets out when we probably really shouldn't have had. I get that the Voter Registration Act, which is a federal thing, requires those to be sent out, but if they send them only on an annual basis or not every time their account changes in any way, it sparks them to change this. So if you haven't read the report, it's available on our website. Investigations that we have ongoing, we have 7 state-level investigations, 2 federal-level investigations that have been accepted for prosecution. We have a lot of other investigations open. I want to be clear about that. These are the ones that have been accepted for prosecution. One involves, for example, some of them involve providers, and we have some state of Kansas employees who are under investigation for misconduct. We had one case that I mentioned a little bit in here. We had a case involving an individual that had assumed the identity of a deceased cousin in order to receive government benefits. She has entered into a guilty plea at the federal level for 1 count of wire fraud, and she's been ordered to pay restitution of $453,000 and change. We also have recently opened 2 investigations involving fraud allegations involving child care centers. So with that, I'd be more than happy to answer questions.
You have a lot here, I'm sure. You've piqued some interest. So committee, what questions do we have for the inspector? Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here this morning. I want to look at, on page 2, the pregnant women eligibility audit. And let's see. My question is, you know, in terms of what we're looking at with this data, are we talking about, it talks about transitioning from the Medicaid pregnant women program to the appropriate Medicaid program per their eligibility standards. So are we talking about an issue where they didn't transfer in time? Like, and what is that time frame?
Yeah, after the end of the pregnancy, whether delivery of a child or if it's a miscarriage or termination, they have a year of postpartum coverage, and following that 1 year of postpartum coverage, if they're still eligible for Medicaid, then are they being transitioned to the appropriate program, or are they being dropped from Medicaid altogether? But they have 1 year of postpartum coverage.
Okay, and then I guess my question more so is then, is there a time frame that is communicated to them that they must transition off that to something else?
That's something that's done by the Medicaid eligibility staff. We'll do that. So we're looking to see is KDHE properly notifying the person and contacting them to say, okay, your postpartum period's ending. Now, let's look at your eligibility. Are you still financially eligible, depending on your circumstances? And can we transition you to a different program?
Okay, yeah, that's the part I was kind of curious about in terms of what notification they're receiving regarding their time frame to make that change.
They would, sure. They fall into their normal recertification period during that 1 year postpartum period, so they're checked out. And KDHE manages a list of people that should be falling off, and that's one of the things we're looking to see, is they properly managing that list, and are they doing appropriate, timely things. We do know there's some people that have been kept on postpartum care beyond 12 months, and that shouldn't be happening. So it's a KDHE problem, not an individual problem.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. General. Good report, as usual. Question on the Aging Disability Resource Center, which is contracted by the state to perform those functional assessments. Do we pay them a flat fee for these assessments, or do we pay them on the basis of how often or how quickly they're doing the assessment, or by assessment? Because it seems to me if we're paying them a flat fee, they're not getting the job done.
The assessments are paid. The ADRCs are paid per assessment. As
Okay.
an assessment, they bill for the assessment.
Okay. So why are they so far behind? They just short of personnel?
We're exploring that. It'd be too early for me to comment on that, but just so you know, too, they recently switched contractors, and Mal Maximus is doing some of these reviews, and the ADRCs are still doing them, but there's a different company that they're working through.
These are NGOs, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome again. You've identified a lot of, many millions of potential savings here in this. Would a tool to help identify this be a help to you?
Sure.
Like a, like, I guess what I'm getting at, I've talked about it before. We've got some ongoing talks with some organizations who might be able to speed this up a lot. And because it seems to me like a lot of this goes on and on and on. And it takes a while for you to physically go find that stuff. And so if there was something ongoing that would kind of help flag that, I think it would be a great asset to you.
Yes, sir. I know there's certainly analytical tools out there that are possible, and things like that do help. And not only would it help our office, but it help other, the KDHE do a better job with theirs as well.
And it's taxpayer dollars, and so either saving dollars or getting the help to the people who need it, and not to the people who are taking advantage.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, very good, thanks.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 3 and 4, you mentioned that some of these people on waivers haven't been given an assessment. Who's responsible for giving them that assessment? It's not the people on the waiver that say, I owe you an assessment, but it's MCOs and that sort of thing.
The state of Kansas KDADS is responsible for tracking that through their KMIS system. We had identified in our previous audit that the KMIS system was flawed and needed to be updated. However, it's never been updated. But that is a system that's used by KDADS to track functional assessments. And those fallout reports come out of that program for determining that. And then they are supposed to be tracking people who haven't had assessments. And each waiver has a manager that manages that waiver that is supposed to be tracking that as well. The MCOs, we've interviewed some of the MCOs. The MCOs track assessments. They have to do their own assessment, but that's not the state functional assessment that has to be done by CMS rules.
Again, a question that Senator Murphy is asking, could not AI do a report out that says, hey, these people need an assessment on this day?
Well, it seems like we should be able to manage our data better. The data's there, the obvious, like I said, some of these people had went for more than 4 years without an assessment. That should have been caught. And again, we pointed out in our last report that the KMIS system, which is the system they use for tracking that, had flaws and was not very user-friendly. And KDADS did not update it. And it's creating a problem.
Is there a penalty for the person on the waiver if they don't get an assessment? I mean, you've had one go 4 years or more. Is it the penalty for the person that has the waiver, or should it be the penalty for the MCO?
Well, the MCOs are benefiting financially from getting the much higher capitation rate. Capitation for a waiver person's like $5,000 a month, whereas for somebody who's on just regular Medicaid, it's closer to $800 a month, okay, on average. The individual doesn't suffer because they don't lose their benefit. The MCO benefits because the individual they're being paid at the much higher rate. The problem comes is if they do get removed because they didn't have their assessment, then they would get moved. If they're still eligible, they would get moved to the medically needy or some other Medicaid program, assuming they're still eligible. But there's one interesting thing that happens, and we identified this in our previous report, is when you apply for Medicaid, if you're determined to be functionally eligible based on your assessment that you need to be, let's say, on the PD waiver, when they look at your income, because that's the part that KDHE does, and is to do a financial assessment for eligibility, they have to look at, for an average Medicaid recipient, they have to look at the household income. But if you're on a waiver, they look only at your income. So consequently, if you're off the waiver, then you would fall into that pool of KDHE having to do the assessment of your financial eligibility, which would maybe potentially kick you off the program altogether, because you would be no longer financially eligible because of household income would create a problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of a follow-up to what Senator Alley was asking. The KMES system tracks, but the MCOs, I mean, they are ultimately responsible for the assessments and have their own tracking, correct?
The MCOs do their own assessments. It's not the functional assessment mandated by CMS. They do contractually required to do a much more in-depth assessment so they can work out the plan of care and do those things. And they do track those. And with KenCare 3.0 coming along, that has been emphasized, so they're doing a better job of tracking those assessments. They have also actually tried to help KDADs track down people who are supposed to have these functional assessments or work. They actually are trying to do that. I will say under KenCare 2.0, they weren't quite as anxious to do it or weren't doing as good a job. Under KenCare 3, they're doing a better job with that, which started a year ago today, or January.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. A little bit different topic. On the investigations, do you have an estimate in terms of how many total investigations that you have? I thought you said that you have others.
We have over 100 investigations open right now that are working their way through the system. They just haven't been accepted for prosecution. Some of them will be closed because we either determined that the allegation was disproven. That happens on some of our allegations that we look at. That's a good thing if you're the person who's being accused. I think I consider that as being a successful investigation if I'm able to basically determine that the allegation was false and that person actually did not commit that crime. I think it's a beautiful thing. If you've ever been accused of a crime, you would love that aspect. But there are also people that when we look at it, we find out that either the information's stale, we're not able to gather enough information, so consequently we cannot move forward with prosecution. But many of them are moving toward the prosecution standpoint. For us, it's just about resources. I will also, and I've testified about this before too, we could open far more investigations than we currently have open. I just do not have the people to do those investigations because this past year we processed over 1,500 complaints. Every year that number goes up. And some of them we just have to say, yep, that looks like that's probably fraud, but we just don't have the resources, so we move them on over to the clearinghouse and let them do what they're going to do.
Remind me, who instigates the investigations? Like what, where does the information come from to start an investigation?
Now, we get a lot of referrals that come through the DCF hotline. People report fraud. That's where the KenCare Clearinghouse directs them to the DCF hotline. That hotline sends them to us. We also get referrals from members of the legislature. We have people that call us directly, just concerned citizens that will report things. So we have a huge intake pool. And I have a person who handles all those intakes, put them into our system. They all come to me for review. I review every single complaint and look at the facts of the situation, how much money is involved, what the circumstances are, and then I make the decision on whether or not we initiate an investigation or move it on or hand it off to somebody else.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back to the National Voter Registration Act, you noted that only about 1% of the registration packets sent out by KDHE were, they checked the box requesting that. Do they have any discretion at all, or does that NVRA force them to send it out? Is there any way to get that mess under control?
Well, the Voter Registration Act requires if somebody asks for it, they have to send it. They have to offer it to them. The way it's supposed to work is you either answer yes or no.
Right.
That's what the report is. But the language that's supposed to be on the KDHE's page is supposed to say if you leave it blank, that will be considered a no. However, if you in the report, you'll see that the state of Kansas entered into an agreement with the ACLU that they would continue to push that, and they actually provide status reports to those groups, and it's in the report that they do that, about how many voter registration packets they send out. And what sparked our interest, and it's in the report, is that we had individuals who were getting 9, 10, 12 of these voter registration packets on just a reoccurring basis. And we just like, that's ridiculous. That's way too many to be getting, and what can we do to stop that? And there's instances where people are already registered to vote too.
Right.
And the state doesn't look to see if you're already registered to vote before they send it. They just send the packet out. And with the cost of mailing and then the human cost of processing and everything, we're just like, this is a way for money to be saved. And I think this is something, we wrote this for the benefit of the legislature, but certainly for ks to take a look at, because this is an area.
Can we do legislation to force them to default to a no unless they answer yes?
Well, one of our recommendations is that they would at least put the language that's required by the VRA back on the form. Advising somebody, if you leave this blank, it'll be considered a no, and also then to get KDHE to actually follow what the VRA requires.
That makes sense. We could save tons of money and time and effort and everything else.
Yes.
Thanks, Mr. General.
Committee, any other questions? I have a few. Looking at page 1, the chart, and you went over so much information so quickly. As you sit here and look at the numbers, I mean, I just want to let this sink in because I'm looking at your chart and I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So these are the audits you've completed since 2021, and you've got columns issue, waste, overpayment, savings, findings, and recommendations. So waste, that's the amount that you uncovered through your audits that is being wasted?
Yes.
I just want to emphasize to the committee, look at the numbers. As we're talking about budget and saying we have a $600 million shortfall over the next couple of years, look at what's being wasted. Now, it's his job to uncover the waste, fraud, and abuse. It's our job to do something about it. And I've said that last session, I'm going to say it again. It's our job to do something about it. He's doing his, we need to do ours. More specifically, and I think you may have addressed this, I just want to make sure I understand correctly. On page, I guess it's page 4 of 5, you cite a combined error rate of 29% for waiver recipients.
Yes.
We know, and we heard in our last meeting, that the SNAP error rate, we're fixing, if we don't get that below 6%, to get slapped with a pretty heavy penalty. Is there any such repercussion for error rates in these other programs that we're talking about?
Not that I'm aware of. But bear in mind, anytime we identify that the state wasted money, the federal government could come back and scrape their share of the FMAP, which is now around 61%, back from the state.
So we do run a risk of,
There's a risk.
potentially, if we don't address this, of having additional penalties or loss of funds for folks who really need it.
The federal government could come knocking.
Okay. On your final page, of course, with the recent news in Minnesota, when you say you now have 2 open cases involving fraud allegations involving child care centers, how were those discovered? Was it a hotline? Can you tell us how those were discovered?
One of them was, well, actually, both of them came as referrals from members of the legislature.
Okay.
We had constituents contact members of the legislature who passed it on to us.
Okay. On the pharmacy dispensing fee, do we have any indication the scope of that? It's $10.50 per over-the-counter. Do we have any idea how widespread that is and
It's,
potential cost savings there?
I don't know yet. We're close to having some preliminary results that I can report out on, but it is still pending. The data is really, it varies so greatly between the 3 MCOs, and plus we're having to deal with Aetna as well because they fall into this, the former MCO. It is really all over the place, and it depends on what drug you're talking about, whether you're talking about antihistamines versus Benadryl and things like that, or if it's other drugs that are considered over-the-counter, Tylenol, ibuprofen, those type of drugs are included in this. And we really, it is such a huge mess that we're trying to get data from the MCOs and trying to make sense of it because they all handle it a little differently. And then you run into issues with the agencies who do the benefit providing, the middleman between the provider, the drug companies, and then the pharmacies. We're dealing with those as well, trying to understand how that dispensing fee gets pushed through and on what drugs. So we really don't have interim results yet.
Okay, my final question is just for planning purposes for this committee. Do you know on any of these ongoing audits when you might be finished and we could maybe have you back to discuss the final findings?
Our goal for the HCBS 2 audit is to have something in March. We will hopefully have an interim report on the pregnant woman within the next 2 weeks. And we also hope to have that wrapped up by end of March, early April.
Okay, any final questions? Senator Thompson.
I guess as a matter of priority for the committee, is there a lowest hanging fruit where we could start taking action on some of this right now? Would it be the NVRA thing? Would it be, if you had a suggestion to us?
That's out there. I mean, that's certainly something to take a look at. We're going to continue to push really hard on the HCBS thing because we want, that's a lot of money, and that's something I think is something we could correct. So.
All right, thanks, Senator Chair.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the prescriptions that are over-the-counter drugs, does the physician write that as a prescription, or does he say, go get you some Tylenol?
No, sir, it's actually written as a script.
Does the physician get paid for writing that script?
Well, he gets paid for the office visit, so I would assume he does. I mean, that's not part of our audit, but I mean, you would have an office visit that they would be paid for, depending on the length of the office visit. Depends on which code they would charge it under, but he would certainly get paid for the office visit, and then the script gets pushed out. So yeah, but they know it. I mean, they know it. They do it because it helps the Medicaid beneficiary, so they don't have to pay for the over-the-counter cost for the drug. They get they're able to go and get a big bottle of ibuprofen, let's say, at no cost to them because it's paid for under their Medicaid benefits then.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thank you so much for being here today and giving this lots of food for thought. Appreciate it. I'm sure we will see you hopefully many more times during the session. Appreciate it.
As always, it's a pleasure.
Committee, I do want to draw your attention to, and I'm going to throw it to Senator Shane. As you recall, he is looking at stakeholder conversations regarding our fire marshal issues, and he has included a written report, and I want him to give us a quick update on his work. Thank you, Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm not going to be exhaustive going through this. The committee is welcome to read through this, but we were able to convene a stakeholder meeting with the State Fire Marshal's Office. That was held on Friday, December 12th. And we held it in 142S, and the meeting room was absolutely packed. It was standing room only. And it was represented by multiple municipalities and local fire departments and their fire marshals, as well as members of the IDD, adult care and healthcare industries and associations. So we started off that meeting. We just had a really nice overview of, what are the things that our constituents are saying, what are the stakeholders saying that have interactions with the State Fire Marshal's Office. And I really want to highlight the fact that the efforts of the legislature, the efforts of this committee, and the activism of the stakeholders, it generated fruit. There was meaningful outcomes for the stakeholders. There was meaningful change and implementation, at least on a short-term and temporary basis. But just to highlight some of the issues that you might remember from the September interim meeting of this committee, there was a conversation about the requirement to conduct full evacuation fire drills at IDD, adult care and healthcare facilities. And the State Fire Marshal's Office did a nice job going over the code and what that means to be compliant with the code. But one of the important actions that came and maybe some of the, we'll say, the behavior change out of the office that was beginning to happen, and they committed to continue to happen, is that formal letters are going to be circulated to the various stakeholders outlining a new approach on fire drills and requesting that facilities submit fire drill plans for review by the State Fire Marshal. And they want to emphasize and highlight that while trying to meet code, there are things that can be permissible in the fire drill plan. That includes allowing advance notification. It does not require alarm activation. That residents must meaningfully participate, but there's a little bit of nuance around that. That there's room to talk about what meaningfully participate is, and facilities can also use assembly points as opposed to doing full evacuations in appropriate circumstances. So, the State Fire Marshal's Office committed to plan review and an enforcement process that is more collaborative and recognizing the need to meet stakeholder needs while simultaneously meeting fire prevention codes. When it comes to egress issues in these facilities, the State Fire Marshal's Office said that current code creates some challenges on this issue, but the State Fire Marshal is committed to granting variance requests, and they committed to sending out a letter soliciting those variance requests from the facilities regarding egress, and that they would generally have an intent to grant those variance requests. When it comes to other related issues with fire code, particularly for private residences that are converted into housing for IDD facilities, this conversation was a little bit more nuanced and centered around fire code as well. Again, trying to continue the spirit of collaboration. And there was a recommendation to establish quarterly stakeholder meetings to kind of talk through some of these issues. And the local fire marshals, as well as the state fire marshal, kind of acknowledged the challenges and complexities on dealing with this particular issue, because there's a lot of nuance and a lot of situation-dependent conversations to happen there. When it comes to our local fire marshals, it was interesting. The State Fire Marshal's Office had sent a memorandum of understanding either the week of or the week prior to this meeting, that came down as fairly dictatorial to the local fire marshals. So they came in very bothered by this memorandum of understanding, and the State Fire Marshal issued mea culpa on that and said that the timeline on this memorandum of understanding would be extended, and that it would be reworked in a more collaborative manner. So the local fire marshals were pleased to hear that. Our conversation on local variances and amendments, the state fire marshal stated that after consulting with legal counsel, that any amendments that had been submitted and are the same as previously approved amendments would essentially receive an automatic approval, which was one of the primary concerns of our local fire marshals and municipalities, and that there would also be change in process, that variance applications and amendments would not just be primarily reviewed by an attorney, but would actually be reviewed by a fire prevention expert. The flow of review, the attorney was the gatekeeper on a lot of this, and not fire prevention experts. So the fire marshal's office is making a change there. On the state fire code, and we heard this in our meeting, like, oh geez, if we just had a modern fire code, then we could actually do some things here, right? And we heard this both from the State Fire Marshal's Office, we hear this from local fire marshals as well. And as chair, I reminded the State Fire Marshal that the fire prevention code is his regulation, and that it's up to the State Fire Marshal's Office to actually promulgate those regulations. And so the encouragement coming out of this meeting was that the State Fire Marshal should initiate a code modernization process that includes all the stakeholders. And that, of course, the legislature will likely need to approve of those code changes, because the cost will likely be in excess of $1 million. But outside of that is the Fire Marshal's Office responsibility to promulgate those regulations. So thank you to the committee for the opportunity to be a part of the process. I think there's some ongoing expectation for accountability and kind of monitoring how things move forward from here.
Well, I want to thank Senator Shane for all of his hard work on this and taking the lead on this. I think this is very encouraging outcome on this hot issue, pun intended. So thank you, Senator Shane. And if you have other questions regarding this, please get with Senator Shane, and appreciate all of his effort on this committee. Normally we do bill introductions at the beginning. Due to our conference schedules, we move that to the end so we could accommodate them. Are there bill introductions? Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to introduce RS 2581. And this is a bill requiring school districts to verify the household gross earned income of each family who qualifies for free meals under the National School Lunch Program, also requiring legislative authorization to receive special assistance payments under federal law.
Are there objections? Seeing none, that bill is introduced. Are there any others?